Welcome back to the techno-communism conversation. Oh, having analog technical difficulty here. Guess that's okay. Welcome back to the techno-communism conversation. I titled this something to do with revolutionary cybernetic socialist theology, and I'm always expecting, or hoping, I guess, maybe not hoping, that people will comment something along the sort of anti-theistic lines of, how about no theology? And that's all well and good if you're someone like, say, Comrade Lenin in 1923, who's just built a planned economy, largely abolished private wealth, and is concerning themselves with the reinitiation of fascistic forces into society. I have not met too many people who use anti-theistic language who are living in the spirit of that. It's mostly a bourgeois stratagem to deflect from real-world concerns, of a more pressing kind. And I used to be one of these kinds of people. I really recommend that you immerse yourself in a study of how to build a humane and sustainable economic system, which is the really almost exclusively the study of the work of scientific socialists, Marxist-Leninists for the most part. There's no possibility of getting to that point where you would be entitled to criticize religious literalists. It's a little bit like there's a man who was you could say a colleague of who's still living, a colleague of Malcolm X and the Honorable Elijah Muhammad of the Nation of Islam, a man named Louis Farrakhan, who's relatively high-profile figure in the United States. And if you were to do a search of the words, a number of keyword searches on the internet, Google searches of the kind to do with black and racism, African American and racism, you won't find a lot of information about the systemic oppression and social murder of African Americans and people of color, and working people generally, but along a racialized pattern, as you would expect in a world of honest people. What you will find is people complaining that Louis Farrakhan is racist. Just stupid. Racist, for example, racist against Jewish people. Is it entirely untrue? Louis Farrakhan is anti-Zionist. Zionists are, by definition, reactionary. The people who espouse the views of the Nation of Islam might suffer from similar failings. It's not entirely fair to criticize the nationalism of the oppressed and the white and put it on par with a white nationalist, which is of course what people in this white nationalist country, this European supremacist country, really want to do. So thus you would see people talking about Elijah Muhammad as a racist. It doesn't really even make any sense. It's just in the ordering of importance of problems, that is like down there with complaining about religious literalism when you live on a planet that's fucking dying. That is literally the situation. And so you haven't earned the right to criticize the Nation of Islam until such time as you've dismantled this fascistic U.S. government, this thing literally killing the planet. It's the world's worst polluter. It's, of course, far worse than that because its only real job is to protect other super polluters with extreme violence. It doesn't do anything else, and this $1 trillion a year abomination that's killing the planet. It's accurate, I think, to say that if Washington, D.C. were somehow to disappear in a puff of dust tomorrow, which I should hope for the people living there that doesn't happen, but if that were to happen, the likelihood of humankind surviving to the end of the century would go up by about 20%. So if you have an organization that's causing the extinction of humankind, it might behoove you to figure out how to neutralize that organization, is the point there. But of course, most people don't talk about the abolition of private wealth, the abolition of this military-industrial abomination. In those terms, they even communists will prefer to talk about cultural things and wedge issue things and just kind of bizarre flashpoints of Twitter discourse all day long, unrelated to the building of the necessaries for establishing and maintaining a humane and sustainable economic system. And I started to realize that I was a kind of person who was doing this in a pretty ridiculous way as well a few years ago. And I guess you would say that the events of January 6th would have been the point where I realized that I shouldn't be such a ridiculous person. I was, at that time, realized that my inclination to criticize those people, the people undertaking the January 6th insurrection, was not that much to do with anti-establishment, anti-capitalist things that I espoused at that time, and very much to do at all with the building of a humane and sustainable economic system, which necessarily requires the dismantling of these bourgeois forces, most notably the so-called liberal democracies of the Atlantic powers, which are not in any real sense democracies, not in any very real sense broad-minded or liberal, but just crypto-fascist and incredibly damaging forces on this earth. I have a bunch of notes here, and I guess I'll just start with the thing that that's at the top of the list, and that has the best kinds of notes. So this is not exactly starting off with a conversation about so-called techno-communist theology, but nevertheless, I'll start here because it does relate a little more to what I was just saying. Revolutionary cybernetic socialist analysis of an advanced computing takeoff and the military-industrial complex in response to a recent Axios article from a few days ago, the end of April 2024, titled "AI Hits Hurdle with U.S. Military in Terms of Trust," or rather, AI hits trust hurdles with U.S. military. Fascistic forces don't trust AI anymore. Oh heavens. It is important to analyze this intersection of an advanced computing takeoff as it relates to what I think will develop from this, the agentariat, or AI-run organizations, changing the ways in which human beings can and will interact and undertake projects, allowing for greater automation and greater collectivization at a great scale. You can watch other shows and describe that at greater length. I will get back to that. And the military-industrial complex of the United States has been a developer of this technology, but its you can only say that when you also say that it's captured this technology to fascistic ends and damaging ends, the killing of the whole planet, for example, killing of our entire species. So this lack of trust, it can be discussed through this lens of revolutionary cybernetic socialism, and again, the concept of an AI agentic class. That is a global network of workers wielding open source AI tools, wherein the human actor, any individual human actor, is engaging with it as a click-through process, but nevertheless, because of the increased agency of the AI, the LLM tools themselves, allows for the undertaking of greater projects than would have been previously undertaken by such a group, or a comparable number of professionals. This, I believe, basically, this fairly unique set of ideas that I have been harping on for these months has also been recognized in the halls of power, the right-wing think tanks, and other intelligence agencies and pieces of shit that analyze this sort of thing to manipulate it to fascistic ends. And they have determined that basically the situation is growing out of their control, which it is, and fuck them. May they burn in hell. So the military-industrial complex relies on a tremendous amount of disinformation, manipulation, systems of secrecy, exclusion, and control where things are not as they seem. And by particularly monopolizing advanced computing and other advanced technologies and wielding them to these ends and for kleptocratic and militaristic, imperial militaristic applications, this military-industrial complex reinforces an unsustainable and cruel status quo without really seeming to do so, and perpetuates on a tremendous scale a cycle of violence and profit. As I said on the show many times, the United States has literally murdered about 40 million people just in living memory alone in anti-communist wars or wars of theft against people whose only crime was wanting to have a humane and sustainable economic system in their own country. And just as the functioning of other neo-colonial projects has been able to do this, like the World Bank and International Monetary Fund, which serve similarly this Atlantic fascism, they have been able to keep this thing which should have happened. So in the beginning of the 20th century, we realized that something quite unique had happened, which is that state socialism existed and was capable, as we realized in the course of the leading up to the mid 20th century, about 25 years between 1923 and 1950, that basically state socialism was able to develop at a rate about 4 times faster by any objective measure than in human development than industrial capitalism had been able to do in the century past. And this realization that state socialism was viable and could double the life expectancy of people and generate industrial capacities at a very fast pace was very bad for private capital. And so they kind of, these imperial powers, these Atlantic powers, converged into kind of a Voltron, a super transformer robot, to destroy the USSR before it even had a chance to do this very thing, because they recognize this. These think tank rats and fascists in the halls of power are not stupid. They're insane. They're killing humankind, but they're not stupid. They see this sort of thing coming in a lot of cases. Most everything that you know about someone like Joseph Stalin, most everything that you know about state socialism in almost any context, or the USSR in most every context, is calculated disinformation to prevent you from coming to this conclusion that state socialism is basically 4 times better than the state socialism in the 20th century is basically 4 times better than the industrial capitalism of the 19th and 20th century. Generative AI and this kind of thing, LLMs with the potential to develop this open source agentariate, have a further potential for even more fast-paced innovation and a high automation of sectors toward human development, not automation of sectors toward bourgeois ends, as has been the case for approximately the last century across this Western-dominated world. This possibility presents a, I think, important and certainly unique challenge to this, let's say, U.S.-run crypto-fascist world order. The concept of this AI agentic class, which is a term that I use on this show, I haven't heard too many others use it, envisions a future where this open source and very easily used advanced computing tool empowers the working class, begins to neutralize the forces of private wealth, and in the near term is able to undertake increasingly complex projects because of this automation of what we could just call intelligence. It's a little bit of a limited word for describing this, but advanced computing with this degree of agency that is already demonstrated in the highest end products of under glass in high-end AI labs, and is starting to become clearer and clearer in the products readily available to you or I, including some open source products to be rolled out in the months to come. This has a potential, even in a bourgeois context, to transform, I think, labor relations. But why would we talk about that in a bourgeois context where it might take 20 years to end this ecocidal military-industrial complex regime, when we have 4.5 years to end them before our fate is sealed and we have runaway overheating and an inevitability of capitalism's climate apocalypse, which may not kill all of humanity. It may merely kill many billions of humans, which I've said on the show would be roughly the same as what someone like Christopher Columbus did in the 1490s and early 1500s, where he took over an entire island, forced all of the residents of that island to work on a plantation, so many hours with so little food that they all died, and then basically he and others like him then began to petition European powers and the church to codify that insanity into law, which they did, and became the basis for today's equally insane capitalism, wherein all of humankind is likely to die. That genocide, where an entire island was wiped out, is no different from the situation that basically all of you listening to this are actively participating in. You're not fighting to take down the U.S. military-industrial complex that protects the system with extreme violence. In fact, you're not even trying to reform that system by, say, advocating for the abolition of fossil fuels or livestock systems or the military-industrial complex in other ways. And so basically everybody in this fascist West is a fascist collaborator in this situation, and by your what you believe to be creature comforts, driving around in an SUV and eating cheeseburgers, you are actually doing exactly what Christopher Columbus did, potentially destroying the entirety of the global south, so that maybe a few 100 million people in the global north, who are the people who created this situation, who've extracted so much resources from the rest of the world, that they will be the ones to survive in this runaway overheating scenario. So you, a person just thinking that you're just a good guy driving around in your SUV eating cheeseburgers, are worse than the worst people that have ever existed. Christopher Columbus, who committed genocide, destroying an entire island, but one thing that he didn't do was participate directly in the death of the entirety of this species, which you were doing. You're worse than a chattel slave owner, my friend. And so how do we get to this point where this sick system begins to be disbanded? There's many paths to this, and hopefully one of them would be pursued in the next 4.5, 5 years. But the agentariat, this AI agentic class, would have the ability to begin to demonstrably undertake large-scale projects collaboratively. So for a good proof of this being viable, I said was if this network were to grow to 100,000 people, 100,000 connected GPUs, and 100,000 people at least then active in this network. Other people might be active in this network who don't have GPUs, for example. And then those 100,000 people undertaking to plan, develop, spearhead, and build a desalination plant in Lagos, Nigeria. If that could be done by this crowd sourcing phenomena, by people who basically could just be in their pajamas and volunteer very little of their actual time, but nevertheless undertake a project of that scale, in my thinking, that would demonstrate that this was a transformative phenomena. Perhaps the thing that ultimately demonstrates such transformative phenomena to people would be a thing more cultural. But again, it's ridiculous to speculate about cultural things, and most cultural things are complete garbage. So why even engage with them? This demonstration could then allow this network to grow to such a size that it would be in a position to neutralize fossil fuel concerns, the U.S. military-industrial complex itself, or this might not lead to some kind of nuclear brinksmanship or protracted civil war kind of situation. It might merely be the case that the U.S.'s power will continue to wane faster and faster, and entities like this will just have greater and greater influence. That seems equally likely to me as some kind of vainglorious kind of envisioning of this. But we have to be willing, of course, to undertake that. You have to be on the communist side of that civil war. You have to be willing to do that. Political power grows out of the barrel of a gun. And if you would deny that, or what you are basically doing is doing that incrementalist or reformist kind of language, which might not work at all, or might take 30 years that you don't have because you only have 5. So you must become not merely a scientific socialist, not merely a revolutionary scientific socialist who's inclined to this so-called extreme action, but a revolutionary cybernetic socialist who is willing to use this most powerful tool in human history, advanced computing, to see that our species does not go extinct. And so you can see this then in this situation where the military-industrial complex type resources would become distributed and more socialistic in their nature, such as those of the DARPA pipeline, and then would become these kinds of things because of open source technology, basically, and because of education and solidarity and collective action, would become a force for social development and environmental sustainability. And I think, again, we could say correctly that the state socialism by early 20th century standards was 4 times faster than industrial capitalism in doing this. And so you could project a doubling of that capability for human development, speed at which that would occur under this techno-communist entity. In order to get here, we have to support open source technology. We have to demand generally transparency in these things, and we have to, of course, most vitally begin to organize this very socio-political phenomenon, this very organizing framework, which is not complicated. Basically, a person of modest resources and influence, perhaps more than a guy who's sitting outside in a park right now, could build a website, begin to create a mailing list of people who would participate in this, and create a work group for isolating which open source LLMs could be appropriately modified to interoperate in this way in the course of mid to late 2024, 2025, or beyond, not too much more beyond, hopefully, because, again, the clock is ticking. And so this agentariate set of phenomena could then be used to more socialistically analyze vast amounts of data. So vast amounts of data are already being analyzed by bourgeois forces and used in very, very limited ways and counterproductive ways. And so there's no looking at the effects of advanced technology and not seeing something that is completely counterproductive. And similarly, the U.S. economy, and that's why I say there are only 2 people in this world, with this understanding that we face capitalism's climate apocalypse. There are only 2 kinds of people in this world, and that is people who are more fascistic-minded, people who identify as capitalists for the most part, who they're not capitalists for the most part because they don't own shit. They don't own factories or the means of production, anything along these lines. They're not independently wealthy. They are just fascist sympathizers, and those people uphold these ecocidal forces of private capital. And then on the other hand, you have the more socialistic-minded, who are people who won't balk at the idea of abolishing private wealth, but who are willing to fight to see that happen. I tagged a bunch of people in this. For the most part, I'm tagging people on this who are on the right side of that, who are willing to abolish private wealth and fight for that. But sometimes I'll tag a few people who I think are close to the line, who might be pushed over the line. If you're a democratic socialist in this present day, who is upset about what's happening with the U.S. and Israel and their unjust war against Palestine, then you might be such a person who is not really considered the implications of private capital in this within these kinds of problems, but hopefully will begin to educate yourself and come to that realization. The agentariate or AI agentic class will have the power to return power to the people, to communities, and groups of workers distributed in the way that I described. And this decentralization and democratization of power will be able to challenge the top-down control exercised by the military-industrial complex and its various fascist organs and allies across these Atlantic powers, principally in government and so-called corporate leadership. The military-industrial complex's response to this will be to sow doubt, which is why you can't read an article, scarcely read an article about advanced computing without it describing AI as an existential risk. It's not, of course, an existential risk to you in any real sense in the way that the climate crisis is an existential risk, or nuclear oblivion is an existential risk even, but rather it's an existential risk to private capital and private wealth in this framework of elitist propaganda. Harm to private wealth is equated with harm to humankind, which is, of course, nonsense. The opposite is true. So this Axios article talks a little bit about these anxieties within the military-industrial complex and ruling class interests regarding this transformative potential of so-called generative AI, which really is, in describing it, is describing kind of the tip of the iceberg of what this increasingly agentic property of large language models and ultimately all other advanced computing models would turn into. And so concerns about escalation or this triggering nuclear warfare, as described in that article, again, these are really, this is really fear-mongering on the part of the ruling elites in a vain attempt, I think, to neutralize something that has tremendous transformative power. For example, the U.S. military-industrial complex is the only entity to use high-powered nuclear weapons, and they used it against civilians as opposed to, say, a military target. They are responsible, almost solely responsible, these fascistic Atlantic powers, for nuclear proliferation. So anytime they say anything about nuclear weapons, just assume that that's basically a lie. So this disinformation of existential angst around advanced computing reflects a calculated strategy to stifle this kind of open source information innovation or other innovations along those lines that would tend to be outside of the power of private capital. And the military-industrial complex can then control and slow its development, which is basically the whole story of the internet itself. As I said on other shows, and by way of example, in the 1960s, a presidential advisor named Arthur Schlesinger, who's regarded as a great liberal lion, I suppose, by some people, was observed that there was, among academics in the Soviet Union, a desire to develop an advanced computing central planning framework termed OGOSH, a thing which, as I mentioned, came to a certain kind of a greater development in the form of Chile's cybersyn under Salvador Allende, before fascists murdered that entire country, or led to the death of Salvador Allende and many others, let's say. The U.S. run a Pinochet regime. So even before we had such a thing as one single CPU anywhere, people were already recognizing that a networked world could lead to what I said. This the industrial capital operating at speed 1, so state socialism operating at speed 4, and cybernetic socialism operating at speed 8 or above, at which point people like Schlesinger keenly observed that the fascist powers, the imperial and colonial powers, would be left in the dust. And so literal trillions of dollars was then spent it was not, I believe, if they could have just stopped the prospect of connectivity or advanced or computing at all, they might have done that, but it was not deemed, I guess, to be possible. So instead, trillions of dollars were spent on turning this into this ridiculous thing of today, where you have $1 trillion operations revolving around advanced computing that provide negative impact on human development or offer nothing to human development, and huge amounts of resources going into this, creating a negative feedback loop for private capital. A harmful feedback kind of thing for private capital. It's been, I think, well understood by serious thinkers for a half a century that something like an AI takeoff would occur, and it's simplistic, but not, I think, overly reductive to say that they've doomed our species to death rather than allow that to happen. Allow for human dignity and material conditions, improved material conditions to flourish, and allow for either the abrupt or slow diminishing of the power of finance capital and private wealth. This U.S. military-industrial fascist regime currently is able to maintain a certain kind of ownership of the data structures. As I mentioned, just within recent weeks, a program that provided unlimited data to working poor people called the Affordable Connectivity Program was disbanded. And similarly, other programs along these lines, like the Lifeline program, have been weakened. So at this time when advanced computing is becoming a more powerful tool, possibly allowing for transformative socio-political phenomena, these things are being taken away from the people who would be in the best position to, say, save this planet. The only position, only working people can do this. And so this is creating a slow whittling away of this kind of open source advanced computing development. But of course, almost every facet of our society could be said to be functioning in this way. This allows the military-industrial complex to continue to maintain control over the narrative with their torrents upon torrent of disinformation, and limit the democratization of information, and ultimately this kind of socio-political phenomena like the AI agentic class. They would tend to discredit alternate visions. People don't even recognize this thing that Arthur Schlesinger realized. There's not even a level of education of this kind, even among the elitists of the capitalist class, to recognize this. So much so that even bourgeois thinkers of a transhumanist kind are rightly disregarded, even though the internal logic of the transformative potential of AI takeoff that they tend to focus on is sound. Of course, the transformative potential will be the transforming of many trillions of dollars more into finance capital and into the coffers of private wealth, not a transformative potential of, say, the things that they talk about, which is a post-work world, or a world where there is universal super longevity. That will not happen except under this techno-communist program. Despite the U.S. fascist military machine's attempt to maintain control, I think that the rise of open source, advanced computing tools, and a growing consciousness of the working class does offer a glimmer of hope. Again, I will maintain this revolutionary optimism that we will do what needs to be done in the time frame, but that is an open question. It depends upon you becoming more engaged with these specific things, and most importantly with the fight against this most successful fascist power in history, the anti-communist United States and imperial powers that collude with it extensively. We have to develop robust open source AI tools, creating easily used, user-friendly tools along the lines of what I have described here with this framework for the agentariat, and use it specifically to challenge the West and this military-industrial complex, specifically this monopoly on advanced technology. The struggle between the agentariat and the techno-fascist West, as I would term it, is not just about technology. It's about a fundamental shift of power at a time when, if such a shift does not occur, humanity is likely to go extinct or suffer a multi-billion person loss of life, primarily in the global south. By democratizing advanced computing and promoting collaboration, the AI agentic class would offer a path toward an ultimately vastly more peaceful, just, and a sustainable future. The coming years will be a defining moment in the struggle, so ask yourself, shall we allow this fascistic military-industrial complex to hold its stranglehold on power, relying so much on this lack of technological and political literacy, or will we embrace the transformative potential of the AI agentic class? The choice is ours, and we must organize to this end. Again, that requires, first and foremost, I think, the use of open source tools like the next generation of Mistral LLMs, or it could even be begun with something like Meta's Llama 3, or next generations of these. But I would be a little suspicious of Meta being one of the worst companies ever to exist in these techno-fascistic terms, that there wasn't a sort of a backdoor exploit kind of built into that to prevent something like this from becoming viable. But that literal backdoor existing may not be the case, but that kind of exploitation in principle on the part of the military-industrial complex is a near certainty. I guess I'll shift gears now to talk about the thing that I promised in the subject line of this techno-communist conversation, which is I was going to talk about the turning International Workers' Day, May 1st, which was celebrated very recently, into AI Day, the revolutionary cybernetic socialist vision for reimagining worker solidarity in the age of automation. But I'm going to save that for another day, even though May 1st is past. It's a few days ago. And talk about the thing that I promised to talk about a little bit, which is the agentariate Book of Names. This, I think that one way of bringing people into this agentariate work group would be to inspire them with the belief that they are among the few people who are on the right side of history, which I would believe to be true. And one way of doing this would be to use advanced computing's vast indexing ability to create a list of the righteous and the sinful, the Book of Names encompassing all of humankind. Again, this is all in service not to some lurid or grandiose vision, but rather to stopping capitalism's climate apocalypse in the time frame that remains. And we, in doing this, we have to consider our own culpability. As I mentioned, most of you are more culpable than you want to admit. If you're watching this, presumably you're a person living with Western creature comforts in a Western framework. You're not. Maybe if you're watching this, you are a person who was, say, at encampments fighting against the military-industrial complex, which is good. But that military-industrial complex still exists. There should be millions of people permanently bivouacked outside of Washington, D.C. until it does not. Because that is the central thing that's leading us to this path of total human annihilation. And as I mentioned, the Agentariat, a global network of workers dramatically empowered by open-sourced advanced computing, could lead ultimately to something like this AI Day, this day when society is transformed in the course of this AI takeoff, and at such time, perhaps something like a day of judgment, where the Book of Names is becoming more relevant. This Book of Names might not necessarily be a literal ledger, although I think it easily could be, but it still could be viewed, irrespective of the degree of its verisimilitude, to a symbolic call to acknowledge our collective role in this environmental degradation and unsustainable regime in other areas of cruelty and the ravages of private capital. This thinking in terms of the 21st century Book of Names compels us to confront the consequences of our inaction faced of unfettered capitalism, the most extreme environmental exploitation, and an unsustainable relationship not merely with the ecosystem but with our fellow man. This acknowledgement is the first step toward collective action to stop the systems that are killing us all. So you might find this concept of advanced computing being used thusly as something that makes you feel afraid. You should be afraid. Your planet is being killed. You don't seem to be terribly afraid of that. You don't seem to have the capacity for fear when it comes to the physical punishment that you're about to endure. So this then focus on a moral cowardice of yours really just reflects intransigent elitism and nothing. Fear is not real. That fear is not real. Fear of AI is not real. This kind of fear is not real. But in any event, a far greater degree of transparency in these new types of institutions, in institutions generally, will allow us to not merely do penance for past transgressions. All of these transgressions are ongoing. Events of the past are of little consequence to the present and the future insofar as this is concerned. But this demand for this level of accountability would allow us to do this thing that needs doing, namely keep our species from becoming extinct. The agentariat then should be able to view themselves as redeemers, and should begin to undertake the collaborative projects of the kind alluded to, undertake the specific building of the so-called techno-communist outcome, that is building this admittedly decentralized and democratized thing, although the decentralization and democratization is not, I believe, an advantage over, say, the functioning of state socialism in and of itself. It's rather a tactic to build something that would be able to continue to operate outside of the sabotage of these fascistic forces, the techno-fascist and imperial fascist forces. Because, as I mentioned, 40 million people have been murdered in anti-communist and wars of theft by the fascist United States. France and the UK are very, very high on this list. France literally murdered 60 African heads of state. All of this to prevent this very thing from happening, this fourfold increase in development that would limit their ability to illegally extract resources. Never mind that if that had been allowed to happen, we would live in a sustainable world. We would live in a world where there's not a billion people who are born and never have the resources they need and die a few short number of years later. That is all owing to the action of the European, and specifically the European, the person of European descent, the ruling elites there. So in order to overcome the set of problems in the time frame that we have, I think this neo-religious set of ethics, this neo-religious framing might be necessary, but obviously it should be centered mostly on secular attitudes and developments, and that there's very little value in using a genuinely bourgeois thing like religious literalism to undertake something like this. It would backfire. Well, I've introduced the concept of the Book of Names a little bit. I'd like to write more about it. Perhaps I will in some weeks revisit this. But this concept of a judgment day, hopefully it allows you to change your thinking a little bit so that you realize that you're facing a far worse judgment day in the form of capitalism's climate apocalypse very soon. And the Book of Names could be a testament to our failures if humanity becomes extinct, or if many billions of people are to die in the decades to come. It could be a catalyst, if undertaken today, for a new era of environmental responsibility and improving of material conditions. So let us choose the so-called redemption through this kind of action, guided by reason, empowered by advanced computing and advanced technology, and united in our commitment to human dignity and a thriving planet.